He's already noticing the gender difference.
Good morning or good afternoon, and I'm joined by my colleagues here who are focused like a laser on helping the middle class. Now, we just saw what happened out of the Republican lunch. Thelma and Louise are warming up the car, preparing to drive it over the cliff. It is just unbelievable what they are doing. Their tax bill is such a mess in terms of not helping the middle class enough, in terms of the deficit, that they're just tying themselves in a knot. And it's sort of like Yogi Berra all over again. They're again they're cutting taxes on the wealthy and taking health care away from millions and raising the premiums of millions of others, all to help reduce taxes on the rich. Does that sound familiar? Well, it does to us, because that's why the health care bill failed. And that is why their tax bill is going to fail as well. It's a backdoor attempt to get Trumpcare back. And the American people don't want Trumpcare, just like they don't want this bill, which focuses its tax cuts on the wealthy and raises the taxes of 13 million middle-class Americans in 2019 and 20 million Americans by 2026. To take away people's health care and raise their premiums to lower the top rate, which is what President Trump suggested, is so against what the American people want that, again, they are just headed for failure. To listen to President Trump is a huge mistake on this issue, just as it was on health care. And yet, they are so twisted in a knot in their eager desire to reduce the rates on the wealthiest people and the biggest corporations that they don't know how to deal with this issue because it creates such a huge deficit, and they go back to their old nostrum, well, let's reenact Trumpcare. Let's get rid of health care for people. Didn't work then. It's not going to work now. What our Republican colleagues ought to do is abandon this misguided effort and work with us to create a fair, bipartisan tax bill that focuses on the middle class, that reduces the rates for all middle-class people, that doesn't raise taxes on 13 million people in the middle class, and that really gets America fair and moving again. Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Leader. I don't know if the Senate is trying to break a speed record for passing a tax bill, but it's clear this legislation needs to be slowed down. The notion that we started the discussion of tax reform and our colleagues said, well, we should make it deficit neutral. And then they said, well, we should make it closing corporate loopholes because the corporations would rather have some of those loopholes closed and have an overall rate reduction. Well, now we have before us a tax bill that doesn't do that. It basically takes 2/3 of the money out of the pockets of middle-class Americans by taking away essential deductibilities that help them live more affordably in their homes, deductions for education, deductions for their sales tax for states that don't have an income tax. So literally more than 300,000 people in the state of Washington could pay as much as $900 more under this tax bill. For what? To give a corporate tax break to corporations in our state? I don't know if that's what Amazon or Microsoft was asking for. I know this, they're not emailing or calling me asking me to open up a wildlife refuge and put oil rigs on top of harmless, helpless animals just so they can get a lower tax rate. So it is time for our colleagues to look in states like Texas and Nevada and Florida and Tennessee and states like mine in Washington that have tax-efficient states, and their citizens are going to be paying hundreds of dollars more. That is not good for the middle class. Overall, more than 12 million Americans could be in this same boat. all middle-class citizens paying more taxes to give a tax breaks to those corporations. If our colleagues want to continue to pursue this legislation, get off the backs of the middle class and go back and cut and close some of the loopholes. They actually are increasing the loopholes, giving the foreign oil companies a $4 billion tax break in addition to the cuts in the corporate rate. This bill is going in the wrong direction. Our colleagues need to slow down.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you. I grew up in the suburbs, and a simple house, 1315 Oakview Lane, 3 bedrooms. We got air conditioning in 6th grade, 1 garage, and that's a house my mom lived in practically until she died. That was our house, and my mom was a teacher till she was 70 years old. My dad was a newspaperman, and we were able to make it, and I ended up in the U.S. Senate. That's a happy ending to a middle-class story. And the Republicans are trying to tell a middle-class story with this tax bill, but it doesn't have a happy ending. And it reminds me of later in my life, some new houses came in at the top of the hill. They had 3-car garages, they had big houses, but we all went to the same public school, and we all were kind of in the same situation in my mind. Well, this bill doesn't do that, because for over 380,000 people in my state, it would mean a tax increase. The latest analysis we saw showed that in 2018 alone, 1/4 of middle taxpayers would have an increase. For 65 million people, these are numbers that Gene Sperling just put out, 65 million people, they would either see an increase or they would see less than a $100 cut. This isn't about the middle class. This is about shoving more money to the top. And I am more than happy to work on tax reform. I would love to see it. I'd love to do something about the money overseas and bring it back and help put it in infrastructure and do something to simplify our tax system. But this actually makes it more complicated and more unfair.
Senator Hassan.
Well, good afternoon. From the beginning of this process, I've joined my Democratic colleagues in making clear that we need tax reform that helps middle-class families and small businesses. But what we've seen from Senate Republicans is a focus on an approach that favors big corporations and truly the wealthiest few Americans. Even President Trump's top economic advisor admits that it is big CEOs who are the ones who are, in his words, most excited about the Republican tax plan. Under the Republican plan, millions of families earning less than $200,000 a year would see their taxes increase, including thousands of families in New Hampshire. And homeowners in suburban and rural areas across the country would have a harder time making ends meet without the deduction of the state and local taxes, or the SALT deduction. Losing the deduction for state and local taxes isn't just an issue in high-tax states. In New Hampshire, we don't have an income or a sales tax, but the elimination of the property tax deduction would be a tax increase for thousands of Granite State homeowners. This legislation is also fiscally irresponsible, dramatically increasing our budget deficit and setting the stage for cuts to Medicare, Social Security, and other critical priorities. And now, after their failed attempts to repeal the Affordable Care Act, what we just heard from Republican leadership is that they're threatening to use this tax bill to undermine health insurance coverage for millions of Americans and drive up their premiums. We know that with the repeal of the individual mandate that the Republican leadership was just talking about, we are going to see premiums increase at a time when they've already been going up. And I can tell you that my constituents are not looking for a very small couple of $100 tax cut to make up for the fact that they may not be able to access health insurance. There's just no comparison. I will work with anybody who is serious about expanding opportunity for middle-class families and small businesses, but that is not what this plan does. This plan would hurt millions of middle-class families just to benefit corporate special interests. So I'll continue to stand with my colleagues. All of us in the Democratic caucus will fight for the priorities of hardworking families and small businesses and fight as hard as we can to stop this plan, a plan that benefits the very wealthiest among us at the expense of middle class and small businesses, and is doing it in a rush and in secret. Thank you.
Thank you. And just one other point here, just reiterating what Senator Hassan said. CBO said that if you if you did what the Republicans want to do in health care, premiums would go up 10% a year for 10 years. That means that in this bill, for so many middle-class citizens, they would, the amount they would, in this bill, for so many middle-class citizens, the amount they would gain with the tax cut would be more than taken away with premium increases. What the Republicans try to, they can't help themselves, and they can't help the middle class. So what they're giving the middle class, or some middle class people with one hand, they're taking away much more over with the other in terms of health care. You know, I'm not, what I'm saying about Roy Moore is I didn't think he belonged in the Senate before all of these allegations. So I'm not going to make comparisons here. I think sexual harassment is a very bad thing, no matter who, where, when, or how it's done, and we ought to make sure that we do everything we can to stop it in the future. I want to salute Senator Klobuchar and many of the others who are putting together not only a mandatory training proposal. Senator Gillibrand is working on dealing with sexual harassment here, as we should. Yes? Nope?
Can you give an update on budget talks for fiscal 2018? And the House is looking at a CR until later in December. Would you be okay with another short-term?
Look, the budget talks are going quite well. Our Republican colleagues are very eager for a significant increase in defense. We're very eager for some increases in non-defense, as well as dealing with some of our health care issues, like CHIP and community health centers. And so those talks are going quite well. I would say we ought to be focusing on getting this done now. This is an immediate problem. December 8th, we run out of money. Our Republican colleagues are focused on tax reform, and they're losing the ability to focus on what needs to be done right now. And they ought to, we can do, you know, we can, the more this bill, I understand their problem, the more this bill is out in the sunlight, the less good it looks and the less good it smells. But the most immediate need is dealing with funding the government, and our Republican colleagues ought to focus on that instead of kicking the can down the road. Yes, ma'am. DACA is an DREAM Act. The full DREAM Act is an extremely high priority for us. We believe we'll get it in the omnibus bill because there are both Democrats and Republicans who want it.
On the tax bill, will you be able to hold all of your own members together? Are you confident
Well,
about
the bottom line is that 45 of our members signed a letter saying no tax increases for the top 1%, no increases, no blowing a hole in the deficit, and do it in a bipartisan way. The three who didn't sign agree with those three principles. So we Democrats are united. But we're also united in welcoming our Republican colleagues to work with us and produce a good bipartisan bill that will make America proud. Not a bill they're so ashamed of that first, they can't make it public, and second, they're tying themselves in total knots. You think it's going to help pass this bill to take away health care from 13 million people and raise premiums on tens of millions of Americans by 10% a year? No. But the way they've constructed this bill is so backward and so wrong that every day they're in more and more of a knot.
Would you guys, if they put Alexander Murray as a side-by-side to the tax bill, would Democrats oppose the Alexander Murray compromise?
Look, I'm not going to we should pass the Alexander Murray compromise. I believe we have plenty of opportunities to do that as the sequestration number, as the omnibus moves forward. We don't need to trade it for a tax bill, and we won't.
Post-Congress
Well, they shouldn't be. And we're making every effort in this Congress to bring us up to what we need to do. And that's what Senator Klobuchar, Senator Gillibrand, and many other senators are doing, plain and simple.
There are a lot of workplaces that are dominated by males that have to learn a few things, and that's in the private sector and that's the public sector as well. So I applaud Senator Klobuchar and our other colleagues of leading the way on this. When you bring more diversity into any situation, you bring a point of view and you show people that there aren't there are certain ways not to behave.
Okay. And I think part of this was the first thing we did, which is done, is that we mandated harassment training, which had not been mandated. It is mandated in a lot of workplaces, but it wasn't in ours, and we got that done in a week. The second thing we're now doing with the Rules Committee, and there's a group of us working on this, is reviewing the reporting requirements and what's going on. That will require a law change that would cover both houses, and that's the compliance office and that kind of complicated procedure that you, Casey, have looked at already. And so that's something we also have to look at. But as far as why, back in 1995, people looked at this differently. We're adding more and more women to the workplace every day, but we are nowhere near where we should be. And I think part of that is, when I look at this, it is not just about toppling famous people. This is also about the shift worker. It's about the nurse in the hospital, the teacher in the school, and it's about having things that create a work environment where people can actually rise up. You wonder why there's only 21 women in the Senate, or why there's no women running Hollywood studios, or there's hardly any women running major businesses. Well, when you have work environments where people feel like they can't get ahead without having to put out, that's what happens.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.